The HOA president tried to steal my lake access 3 times, but on the 4th attempt, she didn't just cross the line, she crossed into land she didn't even know belonged to me, and that mistake cost her everything. I had watched her slowly test her limits, a sign here, a meeting there, little power moves to see if I'd fold. But that Saturday morning, when she marched down the hill with 30 guests, towels, coolers, speakers, and pointed at my lake like she was claiming a kingdom, that's when I knew she wasn't just pushing boundaries. She was trying to erase them. What she didn't know is that before I retired, I was the man the county called when nobody else could figure out where the true property lines were. And the moment I walked out with my old survey tripod, her smile cracked, because deep down she finally realized she picked a fight with the wrong homeowner, and today, she was about to lose. The HOA president tried to steal my lake access 3 times before everything finally exploded, but in the beginning it didn't look like a fight. It looked like a series of tiny, quiet moves, little nudges disguised as community updates, friendly meetings, and harmless signs. People like her never come in screaming. They come in smiling. I had been retired for only a few months when Karen Whitlock became HOA president. A woman who walked like she owned the road, talked like she wrote the rules, and smiled like she was about to grade your behavior. Her clipboard was practically an extension of her arm, but I lived on the far edge of the neighborhood, away from the noise, tucked near the lake my family had protected for 3 generations. A lake that wasn't part of the HOA map. A lake that existed long before these houses, long before the bylaws, long before Karen. It was quiet. It was mine. And it was the one place I never expected anyone to challenge. Then came her first attempt. A neatly typed letter in my mailbox, polite tone, aggressive intentions. She wrote about standardized recreational zones, shared shoreline access, and community fairness. Words that sounded harmless, but the meaning wasn't. She was testing if she could pull the lake into HOA territory. I didn't argue. I didn't storm into her office. I simply mailed her a scanned copy of the original 1950 survey plats, the same ones my grandfather had drawn with precise measurements and iron markers still buried in the soil today. That should have ended it. But people like her don't understand boundaries. They only understand opportunities. Her second attempt came wrapped in a cheerful flyer taped to mailboxes around the neighborhood. Community Lakeside Vision Meeting. I ignored it. Until I noticed where she decided to host it, on my dock. My dock, the one my father and I rebuilt after a storm. The one sealed with our handprints pressed into the underside of a wooden beam. When I stepped outside and saw a cluster of neighbors gathered on the weathered boards, listening to her outline future lakeside rules, something inside me went still. She wasn't just pushing. She was rehearsing ownership. I walked down quietly, no anger, no scenes, just slow steps on the gravel path. The whole meeting dissolved the moment they noticed me. People cleared their throats, looked away, fidgeted with their papers. Karen tried to hold her ground with a nervous smile, but she started talking faster, stumbling on her words. She knew she'd been caught. But instead of apologizing, she packed up and left like nothing happened. Retreating, to plan the next move, her third attempt came 3 days later. A small metal sign hammered into the earth near the water. HOA Lake Access members only. Small, but symbolic. The kind of move someone makes to test if you're paying attention. I didn't react, didn't write an email, didn't call a meeting. I walked over, removed it with a wrench, and tossed it aside like an abandoned flyer. Because I already knew something she didn't. I wasn't a man she could bully with signs or meetings. I had spent 32 years as a land surveyor. When counties needed precision, they called me. When courts fought over boundary lines, they relied on my measurements. I didn't argue land, I defined it. And yet, she kept pushing, quietly, strategically, pretending every move was innocent, but after the third attempt the energy shifted. She wasn't probing anymore, she was preparing, planning something bigger, something bold, something she believed the entire neighborhood would support. She didn't know it yet, but her fourth attempt, the one she thought would finally give her the lake, would be the one that destroyed her authority forever. By the time her fourth attempt arrived, the air in the neighborhood had changed, not loudly, not publicly, but quietly the way storms form long before the first crack of thunder. Neighbors walked a little faster past my driveway. People avoided eye contact. The board members whispered by mailboxes as if rehearsing a story they weren't sure they believed. Karen had planted a narrative, a quiet, careful lie, that the lake wasn't truly mine, that the old maps were outdated, that the community deserved shared access, that I was gatekeeping nature. It spread like fog, soft, shapeless, but everywhere. And then came the Saturday morning when everything snapped. I woke up to the low rumble of an engine outside my window. Not one engine, several. I stepped onto the porch and saw a line of cars parked along the hill trunks open, coolers half, dragged, umbrellas collapsing in people's hands. A slow-moving parade of residents and their guests marched toward the lake like it was a festival. In the center of it all was Karen, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, marching with a confidence she hadn't earned. She wasn't testing boundaries anymore. She was crossing them with both feet. 30 people, maybe more, followed her down the hill, some laughing, some confused, some shrugging because they assumed this was allowed. Karen was pointing toward the lake like she was unveiling a new resort amenity. I stood at the top of the hill for a moment, watching the scene unfold with the same calm I'd had during hundreds of boundary disputes in my career. I had seen this pattern before: boldness born from ignorance, confidence fueled by assumption. But even then, there was something different about her. She wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She wasn't uninformed. She was determined to rewrite reality with enough people watching that it would feel believable. Halfway down the hill, she glanced back and saw me standing there. For the first time since she became HOA president, her smile didn't falter. It sharpened because to her this wasn't trespassing, it was a show of power. But she had no idea what I was about to bring to that shoreline. As the crowd spread out along the water, setting chairs on the grass, planting umbrellas, unloading snacks, and dropping towels, I turned back into the house and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside was the tripod, old, heavy, scratched from decades of fieldwork. The extension legs still had flecks of dried mud from a county job I'd done 12 years earlier. The tool wasn't just metal, it was truth. Unshakable truth, the kind that doesn't care about politics or meetings or loud people with clipboards. I picked it up and walked toward the lake. The crowd didn't notice me at first, not until the equipment caught the sunlight and cast a long shadow across the ground. Then conversations quieted, heads turned, people nudged each other. They knew what survey gear meant, even if they didn't understand the specifics. Karen saw me approaching and her posture stiffened. Her shoulders rose, her chin lifted. She looked like someone bracing themselves against a wave they didn't understand. Without a word, I unfolded the tripod legs, set them into the soil, leveled the base, and locked the mechanism with the slow precision I had used thousands of times. Every movement intentional, every click of metal cutting through the tense silence. The lake reflected the sky like a sheet of glass. The only ripples were from the wind, not a single boat, not a single swimmer. Just stillness. I spent the next minute adjusting the lens, checking the angle, aligning with the markers that had been in place long before any HOA existed. Then I lifted the bright orange flag, the one used to mark exact property boundaries during disputes, and paused. Karen's breath caught. She didn't speak, but her face said everything. Fear, real fear, not fear of me, of exposure, because this wasn't a conversation. It wasn't an opinion. It wasn't a debate. It was measurement. Measurement doesn't negotiate. It reveals. I carried the flag toward the cluster of chairs her guests had arranged on the grass. The ground was soft under my feet, untouched earth that had settled exactly where the maps said it would be. When I pressed the flag into the soil, it stood between two folding chairs like a knife slicing through the afternoon. A thin metal pole with a bright orange ribbon snapping in the wind, a reminder that truth doesn't need volume. It just needs accuracy. The crowd grew silent. A few people stood. One woman slowly backed away, holding her cooler like a shield. A man whispered something to his friend, eyes darting to the tripod. Karen stared at the flag as if it were a trap. as if the ground itself had betrayed her, because she knew what it meant. Her entire group wasn't standing near my land, they were standing inside it, deep inside it. The lake wasn't community property. The shoreline wasn't shared access. The space they'd claimed wasn't open territory. It was mine down to every inch of soil beneath their chairs. That's when the panic started. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet ripple of uncertainty moving through the crowd, people shifting, people gathering their things, people pretending they were leaving for unrelated reasons. Karen tried to hold them together with forced smiles and rushed explanations, but confidence had already evaporated. Authority is loud, until truth walks in, and in that moment, surrounded by the weight of undeniable measurement, she finally did what desperate leaders do. She called for backup. Not from the HOA, not from neighbors, from the police. She pulled out her phone, stepped aside, and made the call with a trembling voice she tried to disguise with anger. But I already knew how this would go. I had been through this exact dance dozens of times in my career. She thought the cops would come and validate her authority. She thought numbers would overpower documentation. She thought the crowd behind her made her right. What she didn't understand was that property doesn't bend to opinion. It bends to proof, and I had proof older than every person standing on that shore combined. The officers on their way, the crowd uneasy, the air heavy with anticipation. Because when the cops arrive, the entire truth is about to unfold in front of everyone. The police arrived 20 minutes later, two cruisers rolling slowly down the hill as if the weight of the entire neighborhood rested on their front bumpers. The crowd straightened. Karen lifted her chin. A few people even stepped aside, as though the officers were arriving to bless the gathering, not question it. The lake, moments ago, filled with nervous whispers, went silent. The officers stepped out, calm but alert. They scanned the area the way experienced responders do, measuring tension in the air, reading body language, sensing where the real story waited. One of them noticed the tripod first. His eyes paused, then they shifted to the orange boundary flag stuck in the ground like a warning sign, then to me. Recognition flickered across his face, not because he knew me personally, but because every officer who has ever handled a land dispute knows exactly what survey equipment means. It means someone came prepared. It means someone came with facts. It means this is no longer a neighborhood argument, it's a legal line drawn into the soil. The officers moved to the center of the gathering, and the residents parted reluctantly, like a curtain being pulled open before a performance that nobody wanted to watch, and yet, everyone watched. Even Karen, though she tried to stand tall, couldn't hide the stiffness in her posture. The pressure finally showed itself in her shoulders, in her hands gripping her clipboard, in the shallow breaths she tried to disguise. Because this was the moment she had spent months building up to. The moment she assumed would end with the HOA claiming victory. But people like her never account for one thing. Truth doesn't need a crowd. It only needs the right moment. One of the officers walked over to the tripod, ran his fingers along the metal frame, then looked at the orange flag planted near the chairs. He studied the ground, then the lake, then the natural markers that had been there long before any house existed on that hill. He recognized the setup. He recognized the process. He understood exactly what was happening. The second officer approached me, and I handed him a folder I had prepared long before this day, not because I anticipated this moment, but because a lifetime of work teaches you to document everything. Inside were the original plats from the 1950s, the updated surveys from the 1980s, the county, verified maps from the 2000s, and photographs of the iron boundary stakes still buried beneath the soil. The officer read silently. His brow furrowed, then relaxed. He wasn't confused. He wasn't uncertain. He was confirming. The truth was there in clear lines and numbered distances, measured decades apart but telling the same story. The lake was private property. Every foot of shoreline belonged to one parcel, my parcel. The officers walked several yards to the old survey marker near the tree line, a rusted iron rod, still standing exactly where my grandfather had placed it 70 years ago. They checked my measurements, they crossed. referenced with the maps, then they returned, the crowd tensed. People leaned forward, some clutched their belongings, waiting for the verdict. The officers didn't raise their voice. They didn't posture. They didn't dramatize the moment. They simply stated the truth calm, steady, undeniable, and the truth landed like a stone dropping into still water. The entire gathering, the community lake day. The umbrellas, the chairs, the coolers, the inflated confidence, all of it evaporated in a single instant. A ripple of embarrassment spread through the group. Some turned away. Some sighed heavily. Some pretended they knew this all along. But the one who broke first was Karen. Her confidence cracked. Her shoulders dropped. Her grip on the clipboard loosened. Her eyes darted between the flag, the officers, the maps, the lake, as if searching for some alternate version of reality where she wasn't standing on land that belonged to someone else. Authority collapses quietly, not with screams, with realization. She had brought witnesses hoping to humiliate me. Instead, she had gathered an audience for her own undoing. The officers instructed the crowd to pack up and leave the property immediately. No debate, no excuses, just a clear, direct order grounded in law, not HOA fantasy. Chairs folded, umbrellas closed, coolers snapped shut. People walked up the hill faster than they'd walked down. Karen lingered a moment longer than everyone else, staring at the flag stuck in the ground like it had betrayed her. But the truth wasn't the flag. It wasn't the tripod. It wasn't even me. The truth was the boundary she had tried so hard to rewrite. The boundary that refused to move. The officers eventually left. The cars disappeared. The hill grew quiet again. Only the wind remained, brushing across the lake's surface with the same calm it had always carried. I stood there for a long moment, watching the last ripple settle. And in that silence, something inside me finally loosened, not triumph, not celebration. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that some things, no matter how many times people try to twist them, remain exactly as they are. Property lines, principles, truth. The HOA attempted their own internal investigation in the days that followed, but it didn't matter. The county records were unshakable. The law was unambiguous. The board couldn't side with her without exposing themselves to liability. 3 weeks later, Karen stepped down as president, not publicly, not with speeches, just a single email sent early in the morning, as if hoping no one would notice her absence. But people noticed. The neighborhood changed after that. Quieter, more respectful, more cautious about assuming ownership over things that were never theirs. And on calm evenings, when the sun dropped behind the trees and the lake turned gold, I would stand by the shoreline, watching the water shimmer the same way it did when my grandfather first walked its edge. Some battles aren't fought with fists. Some victories aren't loud. Sometimes. The truest power is simply knowing where you stand and refusing to move when someone tries to drag the line. Because when you defend what's yours with patience, truth, and precision, you don't just win, you outlast